reality is that.
Alright, so thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate it and time for this. Alright, let's start this. Sound good?
The medical society is shrinking for many reasons, but perhaps the first reason that R&D is slowing down and has been slowing down continuously for recent years is the lack of applicants willing to contribute to that sphere of development. Because there are fewer applicants wanting to sacrifice their bodies for something that is proven to be completely safe, the civilian pool of applicants in the medical industry has been shrinking in the past decade, and thus the introduction of medicine into our society and their prices have been going downwards and upwards, respectively. This social phenomenon has not been regulated by the government, and although many efforts have been made to solve problems caused by this phenomenon, it still hasn't been brought to light properly. Thus, this brings us into the motion. This House would allow prisoners to volunteer for drug trials in exchange for lighter sentences. As the Prime Minister, I will introduce you the definitions of the motion today. Prisoners, we mean prisoners by those with the possibility of parole, those which the court has already deemed possible to reintroduce into society anyway. Therefore, we are blocking people who have committed heinous crimes. We believe opposition should not be coming up here and talking about rapists or serial killers reintroduced back into society. Moreover, volunteer for drug trials. In the same way that civilians volunteer for drug trials, we want prisoners to be able to opt in for these kind of drug trials that these companies or state laws provide. In exchange for lighter sentences. This is very simple. People with the possibility of parole will be either let out sooner than sooner than they plan, or whatever the state deems appropriate. Of course, we will limit these countries to nations with the rule of law. Countries with the rule of law are the setting for this kind of debate because they're the only countries that recognize that prisons are not only for social ostracization and separation, but also for some kind of rebuilding and compensation to the wrongs they've done for society. So the People's Republic of China is definitely not in today's debate. Now, we need a clarification on these kind of drug trials, ladies and gentlemen, and it's trying the effect of medicines in these current diseases. In these drug trials, we're specifically talking about stage 3 drug trials in which the effect of the drug has already been proven by computer simulation and on animal testing, and thus is deemed by the local administration to be safe for human testing. So, to support this, we mainly have 3 arguments. The first is about the social demand for drug trials, and the second is the need for the facilitation of the better research environment. And finally, the third is about the punishment for prisoners is not absolute. But here we're going to talk about the meaning of punishment and what happens for social good. Now, on to the first argument. The first argument is the social demand for drug trials. In my introduction, I introduced to you that the number of people applying for these drug trials is dramatically increasing, and therefore is causing many social harms. It's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. People's health is at stake, and they're waiting for drugs to be developed. Drug trials are delayed or not carried out because of a lack in participants. The development of drugs are eventually hindered because 85% of drug trials, please wait, sir, 85% of drug trials are not happening on schedule because people are decreasing. Yes, sir.
So why do these people who have the illnesses you want to test against not want to try these incredibly safe drugs that you put in front of them?
We believe they don't want to test, they don't want to try for these drugs because they have so many other incentives, they have so many other ways to provide the things that are offered by these drug trials. For example, although the drug trials may offer a simple cure for society, they also offer money, monetary compensation. This monetary compensation is one of the many reasons that people apply for these drug tests. However, as working members of society, there are usually many other ways to earn money. Whereas, in this case, there are not many ways to reduce prison time except for hard labor or good behavior. In this case, we believe that prisoners are given away one of those very exclusive ways to give themselves a lighter sentence, which is why we believe that they're not opting in. To continue, ladies and gentlemen, 20% of there's been a 20% of enrollment drop because of an inability to attract and retain. And the speaker's POI eventually brought me exactly to this point. The ability to retain has been decreasing because people believe that they can allocate their time to much better activities, that they can get more profit out of other activities. We believe that this drug trials in prison allow for a more restricted environment in which people do not have much option to do anything else. However, we're not saying that these prisoners should be forced against their own will. Once again, all information will be provided. We believe that informative drug trials are the most essential pedestal of good drug trials. Please sit down, sir. Eventually, there is a high enrollment drop, and not many people are attending these kind of drug trials. What does this lead to? It leads to a very high cost, and it leads to eventually more expensive medicine. Medicine prices have been on the rise since the early 2000s, and this is in large part due to the lack of people who want to spend their time in these drug trials. Eventually, we believe that the government has the responsibility to seek the cheapest way to provide quality drugs, and we believe the answer lies within the walls of prison. The second, the need for a facilitation of a better environment. Here I'm going to divide it into two subpoints. The first is a better environment for scientific and medical research, please sit down, sir. And the second is a better environment for the prisoners themselves. We believe that this will eventually provide better health care for these prisoners and provide a lot of alert to the current issues with their health. The first, better research environment. Basically, medical testing does require a very specific demographic. We believe that the demographics in prison provide at least one part of society that can contribute to a specific area of drugs. For example, prisons tend to have a higher rate of patients of HIV/AIDS or hepatitis C. This phenomenon is currently less common, significantly less common in the outside world. And if prisons are open to drug tests, or if prisoners are permitted to open themselves to drug tests, we believe that this higher demographic concentration will be reflected in the medical society's advancement. If there are not enough people with HIV/AIDS or hepatitis C applying for these drug tests to solve these problems in the outside world, then isn't it only rational to introduce it into prisons, where it is much easier to conduct that kind of research? Moreover, Andy?
Do you think that of all the people in society, prisoners are the best place to A, manage risk, and B, can be relied on to be the sort of educated people who can make a proper informed decision on this?
That exactly brings us to the other point in that subpoint, ladies and gentlemen. Because prisons are a better regulated environment, people are more likely to stay in these kind of drug trials. In my first argument, I introduced to you the problem of people retaining themselves in these drug trials. Many people quit midway. They don't continue the drug experiment. Whereas in prisons, there is more order, there is more law. People usually think that in prisons, it is the least regulated parts of society. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, these people are closely monitored, and the wardens have good responsibility and authority over them. We believe that as long as these wardens don't abuse this authority to force these prisoners into continuing these drug tests will continue with more success than in the outside world. The second, to the non-research environment. These prisons have problems because these prisoners' healthcare is not in check. These people don't have enough healthcare checking, and they don't know what kind of problems they have with their bodies. This is a very common case, as there are many unreported deaths or many unreported illnesses that go unnoticed. We believe that these healthcare companies, that these medicine companies have the very incentive to conduct accurate health tests to determine what kind of other diseases they may have. This is not because they're only interested in the health of these prisoners, but because they're interested in creating a better research environment. And thus, as a positive externality of these, these prisoners also get very accurate health checks into state-of-the-art corporate standards. By doing this, prisoners can know what problems they have with their body and can take further action to respond to it. Because, ladies and gentlemen, drugs are at a great lack, and their prices are going up because there are a lack of volunteers. We believe that we should move this to the prisons as well. Prisons can provide exclusive benefits that are not possible in the outside world. And by doing this, not only can accelerate medical development in society, we can also make it a better place by inducing that prisoners can also opt for these drug trials. We believe that they have the equal right as every civilian outside as long as they have the option for parole. And that reintroducing drug trials into prisons is a definitely viable option for society and individuals. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the person in this room most likely to end up in prison, this is a debate that's very close to my heart. But even so, for precisely perhaps those reasons, we stand strongly on opposition because we think this is unfair. We think this dilutes the criminal justice system and perverts the basis of parole which is allowed in the criminal justice system. We think doesn't have much practical purpose actually, which seemed to be the large bulk of the case that the government team was running. And thirdly, we think there's a serious ethical considerations when it comes to do with the consent of the prisoners. And I'll develop those points. But let me first briefly deal with some issues from the Prime Minister. He talked about, in the bulk of his case, rested on the simple idea that there aren't enough people queuing the lines to take these drugs, which we say is categorically false. We don't think there is any need. We think, in fact, that there are long lines of people desperate to try anything to save their lives. We don't think his characterization of a cancer patient is accurate or even sensitive. That these are people who, because they don't need money, therefore are not going to do the drug trial for money. There's something more than money they want, which is a hope of living. They're willing to test experimental drugs, even stage 1 drugs with terrible side effects, much worse than the chemo that they already have to go through, because it gives them hope of survival, right? So we think, if anything, there's a huge demand for clinical trials, for people willing to put their lives on the line because their lives are already ending, and anything that they can give them hope. We think the government team completely missed the boat on this. They should have gone for the far more evil approach of trying to test maybe stage 1 drugs on these patients, but they didn't do that, so they're stuck with this. No case. Good luck, the rest of you. But secondly, we say, even if he's right, like the people don't want to test these drugs, then there isn't really a market for these drugs. If you really have to get paid in order to get a drug, and there aren't long lines of people queuing to get something solved, then there really isn't demand. Then it isn't something that is a huge problem, right? So we think they've, again, gonna miss that idea, and therefore the characterization that we're going to provide is that there are lots of people in society willing to do this, and they should, and it's easy enough to get those people. No, thank you, ma'am. The second thing he did very quickly towards the end of his speech on how it will benefit prisoners and so on and so forth, we think that states should provide good health care regardless of these prisoners. It's not in the state's interest for them to have AIDS or HIV. In fact, it creates this kind of strange perverse incentive to create this grounds where HIV and AIDS fester so that people can come in and test your drugs on them. So we think that's a complete point that doesn't really go anywhere. Moving to the points that we're going to develop on outside the house. We said that firstly, standard of release should always be only when a prisoner is ready to be released or reintroduced into society. When that person is deemed to have rehabilitated, which is we consider inexact science, but something that we should strive to do. To whatever extent that person shows good behavior to earn that release, we think that's consistent with determining when someone's changed. So they found a way to manage their anger, their violence. They're willing to really fit into society. So we think that's fair. But giving someone a strange, perverse incentive, like of testing themselves, is akin to buying their way out of prison. And we think that's something that we find unacceptable. Yes, ma'am?
Don't you believe that giving an opportunity for these prisoners to opt into drug trials will be part of rehabilitation process in prison?
That's a nice point the first speaker should have made, but didn't really make. We look forward to refuting it. In fact, I will now, and that's consistent with what I'm saying. We think rehabilitation is when someone shows that they are ready to reintegrate into society. So I respect society's rules. My risk analysis has improved. Whatever reasons I used to beat my wife before, those reasons have faded away from my life. I manage my anger better. Right? I count to 10 rather than punch 10 people. If I can do those things, then I'm not, thank you. I can be ready to reintroduce into society or lessen my sentence. But giving my body to science, it does not meet that standard. So I can have someone who gives their body to science but does not exhibit good behavior in some other way, isn't really sort of socially self-adjusted, then that person shouldn't get parole. And we think if they do, you pervert the criminal justice system. You say that people with X types of diseases who fit within what these drug companies want have a higher chance of lowering their parole sentence than other people. And we think that's unfair. You also say that people who may not be completely ready to be released is now ready because you have some strange function to drug companies, which is not unique because you can have so many other people whom you can test these drugs anyway, right? So we think that's the biggest harm that they're introducing in today's debate, and we think that's a huge problem. Secondly, moving on to some more practical issues. We've already showed you why and how there are really lots of demand for clinical trials in society, so there's absolutely zero need for this proposal. And if they wanted to get more people, there's plenty of people that can pay to do it, but there really isn't any need to focus on this group. But furthermore, we're going to argue that on two levels. Firstly, there's a restricted sample set. Right? The speaker before me said that maybe there's high prevalence of AIDS or hepatitis. These are things that governments are actively trying to reduce anyway. But even so, you have a few million people who come from largely very similar demographic backgrounds in some situations, who tend to not have very good health conditions or awareness, education, and live in a very kind of controlled environment. They're not people living functional jobs, doing day-to-day things. It's very, very difficult for you to test how these drugs actually function. The point that they live in a very regulated life was used as an advantage by the other side, but we think that could be a disadvantage. Because how do you know whether someone is capable of making independent decisions and choices, doing their job under the effects of these drugs, unless you actually have people in real life living conditions, right? And you have this very limited demographic who tend to live in pretty shit conditions. But further we say it's also not very practical because it's pretty poor PR for these companies. You're not going to buy a drug that says safe for you because it's been tested on prisoners, right? They don't want to go out there and tell people that because a bunch of violent wife beaters have been cured from hepatitis from this drug. Therefore, well, it may reach out to, I guess, a kind of segment of wife beaters. But we don't think that's generally something that PR companies want to associate themselves with, and therefore isn't something that these guys are going to be dying to do, especially since we've said there are long lines of people willing to try experimental drugs. Last but not least, we have the point that Andy raised in point of information that there is an issue with consent. How do we actually know to what extent are these individuals making absolutely free choices, right? Because one, they have they are living in prison, they want to get out of prison, they're willing to do anything to get out of prison. Can they actually evaluate the risks that they are taking? How willing are they to take on these terrible side effects? Which the speaker says, plainly, there are no terrible side effects, but we assume that since you're testing them, they still might be. But secondly, we say the large segment of these individuals, have shown a history of poor risk management, which is the reason why they're in prison to begin with. They have poor education, they have poor awareness, they don't really calculate all these things, they react very quickly and try to take the easiest way out of any terrible situation, and they're going to be making poor decisions. And you're going to end up often having to suffer the state picking up the consequences of these decisions when they end up being more sick and you have problems that aggravate and continue to prison, right? So we think on those three levels. On the level that it's a poor standard for release, that we're okay with parole, but only when the prisoner has shown met conditions for introduction into society, so it's not a risk to society, it's changed the way he balances or makes decisions. Secondly, we see no practical, reasonable reason for this proposal. And finally, we think that there are huge issues with the consent of prisoners. So on behalf of my fellow inmates, I'm very proud to oppose.
Still got it.
Think so? Not just meaning.
Hey, Andy,
Yeah.
can I borrow you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Hey, Gemma.
Even if disaster not so
빨리 시간 고백도 빨리 가.
Give me one minute.
진짜 일부러 내가 장난치다 싶었어. 쉽게 이게 받아 적응해 두 배. 쉽게
race, spelling, origin, age, primaries, metropolitan areas.
I think this will
The rest by race.
and what they actually done.
Yeah.
Yeah, just only had a mistake. I mean,
I'll get back to you. We need to maybe correlate a few mistakes. Maybe. Does hate crime by offense at type? Anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic, anti-Protestant, anti-Islamic. Islamic sites. Anti-other religion. Very detailed. 23 incidents of someone being arrested for being anti-bisexual.
Out of how many though?
1,500 I think.
Oh. Interesting coding of the anti-bisexual.
Right. You're upset people can't make up their mind.
Yeah.
그쵸, 리스크 매니지먼트가 뭐라 하지? 너무 막
대문장?
Sorry about that.
I have a lot to say in my speech, so let me directly move into doing that. First of all, I'm going to answer the questions of the opposition posed against the case of the side proposition, then answer their arguments, the 2 or 3 arguments presented by the leader of opposition, and move on to elaborating the last substantive argument of the proposition side about how this promotes better chances of compensation and re-assimilation for prisoners into the society. So let's first start with answering the questions of the opposition, right? They first of all questioned the lack of need. They said that there's a long line of people waiting here, waiting out in the world to do the drug trial because there are so many people who are ill, and therefore we don't see any, they don't see any necessity to allow prisoners to do this drug trial. Now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, we point to you to the fact that there are many researches and medical researches in fact being delayed because there's in fact no long line of people waiting for this. But 2, more importantly, we think that there aren't enough people that's adequate for these drug trials because often we need specific demographics to try these drugs, like people who live under regulation, or people that belong to a specific race, or people that have very specific drugs that not many people in our population have, right? But third response is that this does not disprove the benefit of this motion, Madam Speaker. Why? Because we think if this motion, by allowing the prisoners to do a free choice, if this doesn't do any benefit, we don't think there's any harm in introducing this motion, right? Even if there isn't a pressing need for the society to wait for this, if this can do benefit, we don't really see how their point of there's a long line of people waiting really disproves the need or benefit of introducing this motion. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that the simple fact that we have to conduct this medical research out of the prison makes the accessibility of these medicines low. How? We think if you have to conduct this outside of the prison, you obviously have to pay a lot of money to people who are volunteering for these drug trials, right? In that case, this research cost, ladies and gentlemen, is actually included in the end to the drug cost when this drug is introduced to the market. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we think many drugs, when it's first introduced to the market, because it includes so many of the research costs, so much of the research cost is actually of a very high price, and therefore a very low accessibility is guaranteed to the general public or to the people who are ill and waiting for these drugs, ladies and gentlemen. We think the government definitely has a duty here to lower the cost of the drug and gain a better accessibility for the general public. So moving on to their arguments. Their first argument was about how prisoners are simply buying their way out. They talked about how this is different from allowing or releasing them on parole, because when they're released on parole, they have actually proved and earned the credibility to refit into the society with better anger management or many other conditions. First of all, we think this characterization of releasing prisoners on parole is very wrong. Why? Because we think already the prisoners know that if they behave well, or they seem to behave well, they will be released on parole. So we think they're making the same cost-benefit analysis. We really don't see how this is a guarantee that they have changed the inside, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that's happening. No, sir. And considering how much recidivism, or how high the recidivism rate is in many kind of cases, we don't really see that simply because they have been released on parole, that means that they have internally changed, ladies and gentlemen. But the second response is more important. We think that even if we make them rot in prison without giving them a chance of being released, with contributing to the society with drug trial, simply because we make them rot in prison, that doesn't mean that they're going to earn the credibility out of the prison, right? According to their characterization, if these people are still unable to manage their anger in the prison, by the time their sentence ends, they shouldn't release them. But in the status quo, we are actually releasing them, so we don't really see their point, right? We don't think all prisoners are earning their way out of the prison in the end, because when a given sentence ends, they're already going out, ladies and gentlemen. So here, we have to look at the dichotomy between allowing them out easily, allowing them out quickly so that they will have better chances of assimilating into the society, and making them rot in the prison when they're not going to earn the credibility anyway. Yes, sir?
But now you're creating an additional condition for parole, because you will still require they have good behavior before and then contribute to the sentence. Or are you going to let them get out of jail earlier, even without good behavior, if they volunteer for this trial?
We are going to let them out of the prison if they simply volunteer for this and successfully go through the drug trial, because we think they have made enough contribution and answer to the demand in the society we have. So moving on to their second point, they said that prisoners are inadequate trial samples because prisoners live under regulation, while normal people actually do not live under good regulation, right? But first of all, ladies and gentlemen, we think people who in the end take these drugs are able to control themselves for certain conditions of taking this drug. So we think prisoners are simply enough of a good trial sample and adequate trial sample. And moving on to their third point, they talked about how this is not a rational choice, right? They said these prisoners, simply because they want to earn their way out of the prison and buy their way out of the prison, we don't really know if they're making an educated decision of whether they are risking their side effects or risking their harms, or whether they are able to calculate these harms. First of all, we don't think this is really the case, because as we told you in our definition, side effects, the case of side effects is going to be excluded. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we think this is enough of a rational decision, because anyway, the people out in the outer world doing these drug trials is doing this for money in usual cases. We think anyway, there's some kind of cost-benefit analysis these people are making. In the outer world, money is important, but prisoners, money is not important. They want their way out of prison. If this is a personal benefit for them, we think this is enough of a rational choice, ladies and gentlemen. We don't really see how these prisoners are different from the people in the outside world trying for these drugs, because anyway, they're doing this out of some kind of benefit. Yes, sir?
Well, then why don't you offer these incentives to people in the outside world? Why don't you say to people they can have time off their military service if they volunteer for drug trials? Why don't you say to other people you can have time, you can have money off your taxes? Why is it prisoners that you're picking on?
Because we need taxes and we need military, ladies and gentlemen. But we don't need so many people in prison, and we don't need so many overcrowding prison to be more overcrowded, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think they can do this not doing the national duty like tax and military, because we will see imminent harms to our society when we don't let the people not go to the military or not pay tax simply because they do some kind of social good. Now let me move on to the last argument. Wow, I'm on time. Let me move on to the last argument of the proposition side of how this allows better chance of better compensation and assimilation into the society for prisoners. I'm going to talk about two levels, right? First of all, I'm going to talk about better compensation, and two, I'm going to talk about overcrowding of prisons. Firstly, let's talk about the better compensation part, right? We think better compensation can come when prisoners can contribute to the society. We think these prisoners have come to the prison for a reason, which is that they have done harm to the society. But when these people are able to make it up with a benefit, we think, and answer the needs of the society, we think better rehabilitation and better compensation happens. Why? Because simply making these people rot and stay in the prison is not really a matter of compensation, ladies and gentlemen, because that does no good to fill up the harm that they have made to the society. And furthermore, we think many of these prisoners suffer from the thought that they are dysfunctional and they do nothing to the society, and thus often many much of the reason why they're isolated and unwilling to re-assimilate into the society. But ladies and gentlemen, by making them be doing this and giving them a notion that they have actually contributed something, or contributed a very important thing to the society, we think it allows them to feel that they're a more functional and assimilating member of the society, and because we can release some of the prisoners much earlier, we think we have better chances of assimilating them back into society. But also we think overcrowding of prisons is going to be solved. We think violence or double celling or many of the problems that come from the overcrowding problem of prisons will be solved and is going to be better off for the general population inside for the prisons. So for these reasons, we on the proposition is extremely proud to propose. Thank you.
I just want to start with one comment about the use of the policy, which is, if you believe that there are large sets of drugs tests which don't have adequate people signing up to them under the status quo without turning to prisoners with this incentive, it is probably not a very effective drug in the first place, probably not a very safe drug in the second place, but thirdly, it's probably not a very marketable drug because there isn't a large group of individuals who wants it. If those drugs do exist and don't meet those criteria, the only reason why they could is presumably because you have large regulatory hurdles you have to get over when it comes to having a person consent. So for instance, hospitals and drug companies are very selective about who they allow to take part in any one of these tests. Why is that the case? Because they're worried about being sued, they're worried about the after effects. The only reasons that prisoners will be willing to accept this when others aren't is either because they're irrational, either because they're ill-informed, or in some way they're making a decision badly. In many of the cases they want to talk about, like in the case of HIV, that is exactly the case where under status quo, without turning to prisoners, these are massively, massively oversubscribed. What does this mean? This may not mean that you have huge harms of the policy, though we have them later. It definitely does question about large questions about the efficacy or the benefits of the policy. And thus, even if we show you minor harms, we give you good reasons why this policy should not work. Let me deal with the arguments we heard from the previous speaker first. First, on the issue of assimilation. So they don't really respond to our claims about rehabilitation. All they say is, well, parole systems right now are imperfect, and often individuals are rehabilitated, which you can tell by looking at recidivism rates. True. I accept parole isn't necessarily the ideal system, and the information we have isn't perfect. I would claim, however, good behavior is still a much better signal of whether someone has changed or whether someone is doing better than whether they're willing to take an injection once a week for many, many months. That's our claim on this side of the house. Neither system is perfect, but theirs is considerably worse. And note they respond to Logan's point of information by effectively telling you you don't even need to meet those standards of good behavior in the first place. So they definitely have a problem in that case. But they claim they have a compensating benefit in terms of assimilation. And there's two ways they make this argument. The first is, presumably, that other members of the society will say, oh, they contributed to society because they've taken part in those drug tests. I'm going to posit instead the majority of the population will say they should still be in jail because they did nothing, they still committed the crime and they have been rehabilitated. I don't think society treats these people better just because many people think they got an easy way out. Even if you don't believe that, it's going to be the perception of many individuals. But then they claim it transforms the prisoner themselves because you have the notion that you're helping out. I don't think most prisoners will actually think that way. I mean, hypothetically, maybe one out of many millions of prisoners would, but then the majority will say, I'm doing it because I can get out of prison early. That's the incentive they give them. That's probably the way the majority of people will think about that. And at the end of the debate, then, you have to realize that you will have people who haven't been conventionally rehabilitated, individuals who are still a threat to members of society getting out. And maybe our system right now isn't perfect, but it is better than one they give us. Secondly, they say prisons are overcrowded and this can deal with this problem. There's just a reality check here. Not all prisoners have illnesses where this will matter. The majority of prisoners will never be affected by this. This is probably dealing with at most 100 or a few thousand prisoners every single year. It doesn't really solve overcrowding. But even if we did, we think that is at best an argument for dealing with overcrowding by building more prisons or through other kinds of mechanisms. I do accept it's a problem, I don't think this solves it, and I simply think there are better solutions to that problem. Next, let's talk about the issue of free choice and whether individuals can consent. I don't really ever really respond to this at all, but they do point out that that's to some degree true about all individuals when it comes to clinical testing. There is a lack of information. It is true about all individuals, but there is still a huge qualitative difference and a quantitative difference. Why? One, as Logan points out, that there's a huge difference in terms of these people's ability to process information and calculate risk. The fact that they've gone to prison, often maybe only for minor crimes or even major crimes, suggests they made a big mistake when it came to calculating the benefits of committing certain acts. We think that's something which is true about almost all prisoners, if not all prisoners, and it's a very easy reason why we don't think they are in a rational position. But even if that's not the case, note that they want to give them the information about whether or not, about what this drug does. There's a huge difference between handing someone information and them understanding the information, the difference between assimilating and disseminating information in this case. And we think the problem is, when the majority of prisoners don't even have like a third grade education in the United States, it's highly unlikely they'll ever be able to understand it. It's at that point, we don't even think they can meet the adequate standard of consent that any individual makes before you even throw in the prison issues overall. So we don't think that they deal with those claims. So what else do they tell us on that side of the house? More or less just that there's a social benefit, don't think that's true, and they say that drugs can be cheaper. I mean, maybe some drugs will be a little bit cheap. I don't think that is the case because we don't buy the antecedent claims in the first place, but even if it is, and even that's a responsibility of the state, I think that's probably just an argument for subsidization. Final thing they say, and when the question on this directly is, we say, why prisoners? Why not do this for individuals in the military, for instance? Why not pay individuals more if you are paying them right now in order to take part? Their response is, because we need individuals in the military. We do, but we can probably lose a few hundred of them rather than have people who are massively exploited in this position. Yes, we do need people to pay taxation, and again, with some people paying a little bit less tax, we'll get a huge social benefit out of it. So I think, I don't see why this is such a distinct category in that side of the house. We'll talk about two new issues on this side of the house. First, I want to talk about the principle of criminal justice, but first.
But in the case of the situations you talk about, the state anyway has to lose something in order to do it. But in this case where the proposition is proposing it, there's nothing to lose for the state to do this.
So they're definitely losing a few things. One of them is potentially you are putting dangerous people out on the street and they are committing more crimes. In many ways, that's a far less trivial loss than the losses of a little bit of money on the part of the state. We think that's a major issue. Let's talk about a principle of the criminal justice system. I'm going to claim that this is morally perverse, not only for the reasons we've already outlined in terms of meaning dangerous people get on the streets, which is a major risk to justice overall, but also about the very small group of individuals who can ever participate in it. No, this is effectively going to be an easy way out for a handful of individuals, not many individuals in prison. There are some individuals just because of their genetics, because of maybe their bad luck, because of the disease or illness they have, is they have an option to leave which other individuals don't. We think that is definitely something which is morally perverse, where just because of luck, you end up being able to have an exit option that other prisoners don't. Other prisoners who may well be more rehabilitated, other prisoners who may well do more social good, other prisoners who might well have better behavior in prison, but you still don't allow those individuals the way out. I think that makes this policy unjust, and like all systems, if there is something which should only be accessible to a handful of individuals in prison, and even if you committed the same crime, we think that you should be sentenced to the same amount of time or at least have the same options to do so. And that is why I have this also a difference between this policy and good behavior, which is at least in theory accessible to all prisoners. It doesn't mean, for instance, an individual prisoner has an easier option just because the circumstances of their birth. We think that is something we should reduce in each and every single circumstance where we can. Finally, just in terms of the benefits of these drug trials. One, these people might well be a captive audience, but if you don't allow them to drop out as they suggest, this is probably quite a barbaric process. The reason people drop out of drug trials is they don't see any gain from it or they see huge side effects from it. Presumably they're going to have to allow individuals to drop out. But they're trying to make the claim that prisons will treat these individuals well. What I want to say is in many prisons you won't. In many cases you have correctional facilities who are so desperate to lose these individuals or get a high turnover of individuals that they won't provide them all the information. Look, for instance, at the quality of some of the private prisons in the United States. They constantly assume they're good if you actually realize the kinds of abuses which occur. We think in many cases you'll have private companies or even state companies who don't care enough about these people. You can put the regulations in place, but they still won't listen. At the end, this is immoral practice. It is one which doesn't rehabilitate individuals and doesn't serve the social end. We're very happy to oppose.
Considering that this was a prep case, team elders obviously did not prepare. Didn't my Prime Minister first come up to this podium and tell you that we characterize this debate realistically and told you that prisons are an adequate solution to the problem that we're having in the status quo? Because the reality tells you that the drug trials are being delayed, there's drugs and medicines not being available to the public simply because drug trials are not happening to allow these medicines to be available to the public. Team Opposition's case has been under the assumption that actually the drugs that are needed, most vital in society, there's enough people waiting in the line, therefore the prisons are unnecessary. Team Opposition believes that is factually incorrect because the drugs that we need in our society, the reason why it's being delayed is because there's not enough pool. Unlike what Team Opposition believes that there's maybe just 10 people is enough to actually try these drugs and then sell it to the public. Ladies and gentlemen, in our reality, in order to make sure that the medicine, in order to make sure that these drugs are being passed to the public, we need many more people than that. So under that premise, Team Proposition is already proud to propose. And I've been able to characterize this debate into mainly two clashes. Now firstly, prisoners. Are these people able to make rational choices? What about these prisoners and what about this whole discussion about peril and their rehabilitation theory? Second clash, what about medical research? I think the second clash is fundamentally more important than the first. Because what Team Proposition believes is that regardless of the costs and benefits, we think at the end of the benefits of the public, that is fulfilling the government's duty at the end of the day. Let's move on to our first clash, which is about prisoners. I have many arguments to talk about this in one clash. Firstly, now the first speaker of Team Opposition told you in three very clear problem identification. Now the first problem was poor standard for release. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we think that in itself has a problem because what they're saying is that if these people are done with their sentences after their prisons, that this person is basically rehabilitated thoroughly. Team Proposition poses a huge question against Team Opposition. We don't necessarily think that just because you fulfilled your 10 years or 12 years, you're not necessarily rehabilitated. There is no guarantee of whether or not this person is rational or irrational. In fact, what Team Proposition believes is that using that particular aspect, the Team Proposition should use that aspect and say that this person should contribute to our society instead, because at least this person is contributing back to society and our society is better at the end of the day. Second, Team Opposition also told you that these people actually don't have the proper incentives and therefore they won't learn about this contributive society idea. Two sets of reputations. Now firstly, is that the same incentive that the prisoners have for peril? We think that the same incentive of people want to go out of the prison, even temporarily, in itself is the same incentive that Team Proposition argues. Because at the end, it benefits the government, it benefits the society, we think it is still legitimate. Please sit down, sir. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, regardless of whether or not this person has a good incentive or a bad incentive, what Team Proposition stands for you today is that it is actually beneficial for the prisoners as well. Because in fact, if you have more drug trials, then that eventually means that even that disease that this prisoner have higher chances of probability that this prisoner's disease may even be cured. We think it's all about probability, right? Even we don't say in Team Proposition that we can guarantee the drug trials being successful. We cannot guarantee anything in this society. But what we do believe is that because drug trials, if they become more prevalent, if there's more availability, then there is a higher chance of curing more people. That in itself is proper. That in itself is important. Please sit down, sir. Now the third argument that we've heard from Team Opposition about calculating risk, because these prisoners are so irrational that they cannot make decisions on their own. Two sets of reputations, one reputation against this. Ladies and gentlemen, if we believe that the irrationality and rationality becomes a point of discussion in today's debate, then why don't we have educational policies in outside of prisons as well? We think of rationality and irrationality becomes over whether or not this person is available and eligible to have drug trials or report and participating in drug trials. We think everything has to come with education policies or making sure these people is learning. We think that the same criteria happens in the prisons, and therefore we say that this particular point does not stand. Yes, sir.
Okay, let's even assume they're rational. They still have to be given a lot of technical information and understand it. You can try to educate them, but we've been trying that in prison for years. And it's not particularly easy to educate someone 40 who's used to be a drug addict. That's why many of these people will never be able to understand the information.
What we understand is that regardless of whether or not this person understands or not, firstly, the government is at least trying to make sure that this person is participating in society. But more importantly, it shows that the government is going in and trying to say society, ladies and gentlemen. Team opposition tells you that the prison itself is negligent. It could actually be even misused. That is exactly what team proposition solves. If the government is going in, shining more light on prisons, isn't that in itself what team proposition and Prime Minister told you about? That if government cares more about these people, the healthcare systems, that there will be more healthcare checked up on these prisoners. That in itself is what government actually solves. Now the fourth point that we heard under this clash about how it's unfair for these other prisoners because this is very selective. That because this person was fortunate enough to have one disease, that this person was able to have drug trials. We think, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why this is eligible and this is legitimate is because this person has the disease and also make their own voluntary choice to make a decision to be a part and participate in this drug trial. We don't necessarily think it's a luck or chance. In fact, we think if the diseases are, what we think is that it is unfortunate that maybe not all prisoners have diseases, but we need to make use of these prisoners who can participate for our society. Now let's move on to our second clash, which is about medical research. Now this particular clash, we think, in team proposition is a lot more practical and actually legitimate in solving the problem. Because what team opposition is merely doing is saying that, you know what, this can be solved outside of prisons. We don't necessarily need more people to be part of the drug trials. We think in that case, team opposition cannot solve the problems that the status quo, that reality is really facing with not having enough people participating in drug trials. So let's first look at the first point that team opposition gave you. That there is a long line waiting and that the popular drugs will be able to be tested anyways. We think that in itself is a fundamental problem of opposition. Because what they're exactly saying, and fundamentally, is that only the most important drugs, only the most popular drugs will be tested. We don't think there is an important drug or a popular drug in the status quo. We think every drug which can save a life of a citizen is important, which is exactly only the prisons can provide. Yes, sir.
But that's exactly the point of determining the importance of a drug. Because you guys are saying there are people who don't think these drugs are important enough for them to sign up. So if those drugs are not important enough,
we don't
why
think it's a matter of desire or they think this is legitimate enough. It's the fact that there's not enough pool to make sure that these drugs are legitimate to be part of the market. There is a criteria to make sure that there is a certain pool that passes, but that certain pool is not being fulfilled, which is why these drugs are not being adequately available to our society. Second, accessibility. The team proposition continue to tell them that by allowing these people, allowing prisoners to be participating in drug trials will be increasing accessibility. Team opposition simply said, no, that's not really going to happen. The deputy leader of opposition simply said, that's only marginal, that's only trivial. We don't think it's trivial, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look at a new medicine, for example. When a new medicine is first introduced, they need to go through a huge procedures. And when it is first introduced, only the richest people, because there is such a lack of medicine available, only the richest will be able to obtain such medicine. That in itself causes a rich and poor disparity. We think that in itself is a problem as well. But thirdly, the last point that I want to make is that the opposition told us that the controlled lifestyle in itself does not particularly correlate with the society as a whole, and therefore the everyday life and the prison life is so vastly different that it will not be legitimate at all. What team proposition believes is that we're not going to make sure all drugs are being tested in prisons. There are a specific group of people who will be part of an experiment which allows more variety. So at the end, we think team proposition is the one who solves the real problem. Thank you.
아버지.
아저씨.
Well, it's ironic, ladies and gentlemen, for a team that mocked us for not doing any preparation, a team that had this motion for 2 weeks, a team whose entire case is based on the premise there is this terrible need in the status quo for volunteers for drug trials because people simply aren't volunteering for them in the status quo. What evidence did we have for this? Absolutely zero, ladies and gentlemen. Not even an article from USA Today would trade in aid of this particular contention. We think when they go to Thailand, they'd better have some actual evidence for this because we simply don't accept on this side of the debate it's true. So what we want to talk about on this side of the debate, I want to look at this in terms of 3 groups of stakeholders. First of all, the drug companies, which they seem to be very concerned about. Secondly, prisoners. And then thirdly, something which has been almost forgotten by the proposition in this debate, which is society, the rest of us, and how we are affected by this wacky scheme that they've come up with on the proposition side today. let's start with the first stakeholder here, the first group of stakeholders, the drug companies who seem to have sponsored the case from Team Korea today. We've come up with all sorts of reasons why drug companies, first of all, wouldn't want to do this. Secondly, wouldn't benefit from doing this. Let's go through a few of them because we've not had many responses. First of all, we told you this is horrible PR. This is sort of Chinese-style testing stuff and prisoner stuff, even though, of course, these are people who have consent. Nonetheless, we say from a PR point of view, this is probably not something drug companies would want to get involved in. We've had no response from that side of the debate. Then we talked to you about the poor sample set. And you know, the Prime Minister stood up and said, well, this is great because drug companies want to test on like particular demographics and particular races, and this would be fantastic. First of all, we think, what particular race and what particular demographic might we be talking about when we're talking about prisoners, ladies and gentlemen? We're talking about young, we're talking about male, we're talking, let's be honest, about ethnic minorities. Contrary to what the Prime Minister told you, he gave you this idea that prison is some kind of rainbow nation where there'll be a perfect demographic society. This is complete nonsense. We have people who are jacked up to the eyeballs on drugs, ladies and gentlemen. Again, no response from that side of the debate. Not exactly the sort of people that you want to have involved in clinical trials. So as Harish told you in his speech, really we're talking about very few prisoners who would really be suitable for this kind of trial. They talked about cost. They tried to tell you the cost of drugs in the status quo is all because of these stage 3 trials. Once every other stage has been gone through, once the authorities tell us, yes, these drugs are safe for human consumption and safe for human trials, that's when the real costs kick in, according to the proposition. And by paying volunteers, suddenly we're creating this massive extra cost, and there's going to be a gap between rich and poor. All sorts of bogus arguments from that side of the debate. If people are being charged too much for cancer drugs in the status quo, that's an issue for reforming healthcare. It's not an issue for testing them on prisoners. And then finally they talk, well, I think generally propositions seem to misunderstand at times who it is we're actually testing these drugs on. Yes, of course, we're talking about paying students in the status quo, giving them money to take drugs. We're also talking about people who are suffering from these diseases. We're talking about people who are suffering from cancer, who are told, we're going to give you an experimental treatment. We know it's safe, we don't know it'll work. Are you willing to be part of that trial? We think those people are far better test subject than prisoners in a prison who may have AIDS, for example. Again, there was no response to the proposition. So we think, from the point of view of the drug companies, we don't see any reason why this would be an improvement on the status quo. Let's look at the second stakeholders, the prisoners. Now again, there was very little response to our issues here about the questions of risk management, the questions of education. Are prisoners really the sort of people who are in a position to make an informed consent on whether or not they should be taking a drug which may potentially be dangerous? We told you in this side of the debate, no. Because by definition, these are people, I'll take you in a moment, by definition these are people who are not very good at balancing risk. These are people who thought, yeah, you know what, let's scale over that fence to steal that television. That's a great idea. We also think that, by definition, these tend to be people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who tend to have lower educational outcomes and lower educational qualifications. So overall, we're not really sure this is the perfect group of people that you would ask, that you would trust to be able to make an informed decision on the matter of potentially of life and death. Yes, ma'am.
And citizens outside of prison who are also almost about to die if they don't have drugs, are these people rational people as well?
No, we totally agree. They're not making a perfectly rational decision. The difference in this case is that we're not talking about people who are about to die. We're talking about people who may potentially be dangerous, who may be exposing themselves to physical risk, and who aren't in a position properly to manage that mentally and to make an informed decision on that basis. So we think the comparison to people who are suffering from cancer, who have 6 months to live, and a prisoner who may potentially have 60 years of life left, but doesn't have the education and intellectual ability to properly make that distinction in his mind, we don't think that's a fair comparison. So what else they tell us in prisoners on that side of the debate? Well, the Prime Minister told us, well, prisoners are great test subjects because they're less likely to quit halfway. Well, I bet they are, of course, because they're behind bars. Of course they're less likely to quit halfway. We think that's completely bogus. Then they told us, well, this would be great because drug companies will be coming into prisons. They're going to be giving them state-of-the-art healthcare at the same time as pumping them full of untested drugs. But no, again, the state should be providing with adequate healthcare. The state in developed countries is not providing prisoners with adequate healthcare. We think that's a disgrace. No, thank you. We think that's something government should address. And then finally we heard, well, this will solve the problem of prison overcrowding. It's an absolute classic, ladies and gentlemen. You know what else would solve the problem of prison overcrowding? Simply opening the prisons, letting them all go. Well, why we don't do that? Why not? Well, that brings us, I guess, to the third point in this side of the debate, which is about society. Why don't we do this? Why don't we simply let out a random sample of prisoners every month in order to ease prison overcrowding? Why not? Well, first of all, because public opinion wouldn't stand for it. But secondly, because we accept that prisoners are high-risk people. Prisoners are in jail for a reason. Now, we accept what the Prime Minister said at the beginning of the debate. This is not a debate about murderers and rapists. That's absolutely fine. Nonetheless, there are reasons why even non-violent offenders are in prison. And we're also talking about violent offenders. We may be talking about burglars, for example, who've assaulted the people that they were robbing and have the chance to go, thank you, parole. But, let's leave that to one side. We're talking about people who have been deemed to be dangerous, who have not been released yet because they've been given a certain sentence by the criminal justice system in our country. As we have said in this side of the debate, we think it is morally perverse to release those people for reasons which have nothing to do with their mental state, which have nothing to do with their contribution to society, that simply have to do with how much they were able to benefit a private drug firm. We think that is morally reprehensible from this side of the debate. So when Lauren said in her speech, this is all about probability, this debate is all about probability, we would like to ask the proposition, given there is a higher probability of crimes being committed by criminals if they're outside prison rather than inside, how can you justify that to the rest of society in order to benefit a few private drugs companies and save them a few pounds or a few dollars on their R&D costs? We simply don't think that's acceptable. So what we've told you in this side of the debate is that there is a reason why we release people when we do. We try to measure that these people have been, in some way, been rehabilitated. In some way, they've left behind the anger, left behind the problems in their past. Now, we agree this isn't perfect, we've already said. How do we measure this? How do we measure this? Well, we try and encourage people to perform good acts, good behavior. We get them to scrub off graffiti, we get them to help old people, etc., etc. And this has the benefit of making people see what they've done wrong, and make people see that better behavior can lead to better outcomes. Now, we don't think that taking drugs is this kind of morally transformative behavior on the opposition. It is merely transactional. It is merely saying, if you do X, then you will receive Y. And we think that is completely different from encouraging people through education, through rehabilitation programs, to try and be more useful members of society. Yes, it's not perfect, but we think it's a damn sight better than the alternatives were given by the proposition. Because the final objection they had was, well, we can never guarantee that people, even at the end of their sentences, are going to be rehabilitated. And to that we have two responses. First of all, that is not an argument for releasing them earlier. If we can't guarantee that they're rehabilitated, that's an argument for not releasing them at all. It's an argument for keeping them in prison longer. It's not saying, if you take this drug, we're going to let you out. But finally, unless you're rejecting the principle of parole entirely, we have to make our best determination. We have to make our best attempt at deciding when people are rehabilitated. When the Deputy Prime Minister threw this out altogether in a speech, when she said, we don't care about the good behaviour as long as you take the pill, we think that's when they lost this debate. For all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we're very proud to have.
Well, I guess you won't have to try very hard to persuade prisoners to take risky drugs. I guess that would be an advantage. They'll be lining up to take these drugs. At the very least, will give them kind of a buzz. What's important for us to determine here at the end of this debate is the exact burden on the government team today. We don't think it's enough for them to just put out good intentions and say that at least we're trying something, the harm's minimal. At the very end, it's zero net impact, because we either don't impact any prisoners at all, if what you're saying is true, or at the end no one actually gets very harmed at all. We don't think that's true. We think what they're proposing is actually pretty radical. It goes against what we as a society has agreed is a fair and just punishment for prisoners. It impacts how people view the justice system. It impacts how safe we feel in society, because we put people behind bars for a very specific reason, and we remove a lot of their rights, and then it gets to a certain point where we as a society say that you have served your time, and then you come out, and then you get all those rights back, right? So they need to show a significant and real benefit to society without a huge harm, and we say they failed. They completely failed. And I'll go recap Andy's speech, because that's pretty much going to be my reply. But I think the two huge critical errors they made in this debate that contributed to their downfall. And the firstly was the characterization of the drug companies and drug trials. So beyond this, whether or not there's huge lines or no huge lines and also so on and so forth, they chose drugs that were almost safe at the final stage of testing, and drugs that were also critical to save people's lives, right? Obviously. But these drugs, and exactly because of this choice, we say that our characterization of whether or not there's demand and whether or not people be willing to take these drugs is probably the right one. Because there is nothing wrong with these drugs, and they're critical to save your life. We cannot, for any rational reason, imagine someone with a critical disease not wanting to try these drugs. In fact, they don't want to be on the placebo line. They want to actually get those drugs so that they can live, right? So based on that strategic choice, they lose the bid. But further, they said that this is not going to be a condition in addition to good behavior for parole, or that would mitigate good behavior a little bit, like 10% good behavior, 30% you take strange drugs. It will replace parole. So you don't, good behavior. So instead of the good behavior equivalent, we just need to get jacked up on these strange drugs. We think that is terrible idea, because that creates this perverse incentive among these criminals who do pretty strange things. These are people who will risk their lives to escape from prison, mind you. And as we've argued, have pretty bad rationality to participate in these trials so that they can escape from prison, right? So we think those two things show that there is absolutely no benefit from this, because it supports our characterization of these trials and these companies, and proves that we create this incredible amount of harm, right? On the three levels, and this is me recapping Andy's speech. Firstly, in regards to drug companies, where there are plenty of people who do this, and any gain they will get is marginal, and no drug company wants to market themselves as in relation to any prison, any prisoner, regardless of how rainbow they may be. Secondly, to the prisoners, that they should, and all levels, deserve adequate healthcare, and they deserve, as citizens of the country, some other reasonable mechanism to alleviate the problems that exist in prison. And this impacts their rationality, and we've showed that even if the standard of rationality is vague, it is still far more dubious to do this in prison. Even if they have the same calculus in wanting to free themselves, the education, the ability to understand these risks are terribly in question. And finally, and most critically, on society, that is far less likely that society will be willing to accept it. And even if they say sentencing is dodgy, sentencing is what we as society has decided is fair. And if you've met that standard, then it's fair for you to be released. You are allowing people to not meet that standard and not give society anything back in return. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is unacceptable.
My incarcerated opposition tried to tell us that prisoners were so different from society, but in order for their case to stand, they needed to prove that there was a long line willing to test these drugs. Whereas in our Prime Minister's speech, we have identified to you that there's been a 20% decrease, and 85% of drug trials are being delayed because there is a lack of people willing to attend these trials, ladies and gentlemen. Clinical trials are inherently facing damage because there are not enough applicants. And their hypothetical analysis that there are enough people simply because there are people motivated to solve their own problems by their own means is not any rebuttal for this whatsoever. It does not provide a basis to deny that drug trials are not coming through because there is a lack of applicants. In this debate, there are mainly three spheres of clash. The first is about transformative behavior, about how we're going to compensate the society, and here we have to discuss the true meaning of punishment. The second is about free choice, and the third is definitely about necessity, which has been the basis and the premise for both sides. About transformative behavior. Rehabilitation is deemed to happen based on arbitrary standards, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the proposition has already made this clear, and Andy has conceded this in his third speech. Although he tried to use this as a sort of means to say that, well, if rehabilitation is meaningless anyway, shouldn't we be releasing everyone into society? We rather believe on proposition side that this is based on societal compensation. If you have wronged society, then you have to do something that benefits it. And benefiting it comes from releasing drugs or lowering the cost of drugs that are going to save lives, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we have to provide an analysis about how this is different from good behavior or hard labor, about other things that motivate prisoners to do things that they would otherwise not do. These people, nobody can prove that these people become better people in the process, ladies and gentlemen, because ultimately they have chosen to do this good behavior with the prospect of release, with the prospect of early release, ladies and gentlemen. And we have identified this as equal things in the first and second speeches. Ultimately, what are they doing? They're following rules and regulations. Good behavior is dictated by following your prisoner warden. They have already characterized for us instead in their second speech that this involves a long process, months of injections, right? This also involves following rules. If following rules for good behavior and if following rules for drug testing are so similar, why can't we deem that if they have similar benefits to society, prisoners are not changed by this? Ultimately, they also conceded this is a good point because prisoners are changed by the prospect of contributing to society that they have once wronged. We believe that it's based on adequate compensation for past wrongdoings. And since we've already proven the necessity of having drugs introduced into society at a faster rate, at an accelerated rate, and for a lower cost, we believe the opposition cannot simply come up here and deny that these prisoners are contributing to us. Now, about free choice. What is this free choice, ladies and gentlemen? As I briefly introduced in my first sphere of rebuttal, free choice is simply the prisoner making the decision by him or herself. They've tried to come up here with the rationale that these prisoners are dumb. Not only are they ostracizing people and prisoners, but how can we guarantee that everyone coming up to a drug trial outside of jail are rational people, are well-educated people? Almost no one who will willing to take these drug tests, ladies and gentlemen, are medical professionals as they so prescribe to us. In fact, as our third speaker said, quite a lot of these people are, as they said, motivated by the prospect of solving their own problems. That's why, as they said, they're willing to take stage 1 tests. Although this is factually untrue, the point still stands, ladies and gentlemen, that these people are usually motivated by things that would otherwise impair their rational decision because they want to save their own lives. If they have not proven that these people are more rational, more well-educated, and are more professional in the medical sphere than these inmates, what makes it any different, ladies and gentlemen? The government is simply expanding the pool to people who are no different, are motivated by practically the same reasons, whether it be money or shorter incarceration time. At the end, we're solving a problem. And when criminal punishment is result-oriented, we believe that this is the exact way they can do this. And then finally, on necessity. It's a very simple point, ladies and gentlemen, that I've introduced in my introduction. Is there a necessity? Lines are getting shorter, drugs are not being introduced into society, and the prices are going higher. They have disagreed with this problem identification simply because of hypothetical reasons, because people are willing to stand in lines, right? This is contrary to what actually happens in reality. And although they tried to prove to us, or tried to prove in this debate, that people are going to stand anyway, reality proves contrary. There is a necessity to introduce drugs, and simply if increasing the pool has no big societal harms, we believe the government is doing its duty. Thank you.